I checked my mailbox every day for 3 weeks, each time with a flutter of anticipation, only to find bills, advertisements, and the occasional card from clients thanking me for planning their perfect events. But never the cream-colored envelope with gold embossing that I knew the Pearsons would select for their son's engagement celebration. They're probably just finalizing the guest list, I told myself the first week. Perhaps there was a delay at the printers, I reasoned during the second. By the third week, I had run out of excuses. The engagement party for my only son, my James, was happening in 2 days, and I still hadn't received an invitation. I stared at my phone for 20 minutes before finally calling him. 3 rings, then 4. Just as I was about to hang up, his voice came through, slightly distracted. "Hey, Mom, can I call you back? I'm in the middle of something." "Of course," I said automatically, the response of a mother who had spent 32 years accommodating her child's schedule. "It's just, I wanted to ask about the engagement party. I haven't received an invitation yet, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't lost in the mail." The pause lasted just a beat too long. "Oh, that." Another pause. "It's just a small gathering, Mom. Mostly Vanessa's family's social circle, and some of our friends from the city." "I see," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. So it's not a formal engagement party?" James sighed. That particular exhalation I'd heard since his teenage years when he found my questions tedious. "It's at the Pearson Country Club, but it's not a big deal. Just a reception, really. You wouldn't enjoy it. You don't know anyone there." "I know you," I said quietly. "And Vanessa." "Mom, it's just a reunion. Nothing important." The dismissal stung, but I swallowed my hurt. "Well, if you're sure. I'd still like to celebrate with you both sometime soon. Maybe a dinner next week?" "Sure, we'll figure something out." His tone brightened with relief at my apparent acceptance. "Listen, I've got to go. Vanessa and I are meeting with the venue coordinator." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen island, staring at the calendar where I had optimistically blocked off Saturday evening for James's engagement celebration. Beside it, in my neat handwriting, was a reminder to pick up the gift I'd specially ordered. A pair of vintage crystal champagne flutes that had taken me months to source from an estate sales specialist. I was contemplating whether to return them when my phone chimed with a text from Lisa, my assistant at Wellington Events. "Diana, quick question. Did you see Caroline Williams' Instagram story? She's asking if we can recommend a good hairstylist for James's engagement party on Saturday. Said she's never been to an event at the Pearson Club before and wants to make the right impression." My heart sank. Caroline Williams was the daughter of clients I'd worked with for years. I'd planned her Sweet 16, her college graduation party, and most recently, her brother's wedding. And apparently, she had been invited to my son's engagement celebration. With trembling fingers, I opened Instagram and navigated to Caroline's profile. There it was in her stories, a flat-lay photo of the invitation I had been waiting for, cream-colored with gold embossing, just as I had imagined. "Celebrating the engagement of James Wellington and Vanessa Pearson," it proclaimed in elegant script, followed by details of a black tie event for 200 guests at the most exclusive venue in our region. 200 guests, and I wasn't one of them. I sat very still, allowing the realization to wash over me. This wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a lost invitation. My exclusion had been deliberate. 32 years of memories flashed through my mind. Nights spent soothing infant James through colic, working double shifts to afford his private school tuition after his father died, driving 5 hours each way every weekend during his first year of college because he was homesick. The business I had built, event by event, to ensure he would have every opportunity. The pride that swelled in my chest at his graduation, his first job, his promotion. And now, this. With mechanical precision, I opened my banking app and navigated to the special account I had set up 6 months earlier. James and Vanessa's Honeymoon Fund, I had named it, transferring a portion of every event payment until it reached $25,000. It represented countless 12-hour days, challenging clients, and meticulous planning, all driven by the vision of giving my son and his bride the honeymoon my late husband and I had never been able to afford. My finger hovered over the transfer button. If I did this, it would change everything between us. A line would be crossed that we might never move back from. Then Caroline's Instagram story flashed in my mind again. 200 guests raising glasses in celebration while I sat home alone, uninvited and unwanted. I pressed transfer funds and watched as $25,000 moved back into my personal account. Next, I opened my email and composed 3 messages to exclusive resorts in Bali, the Maldives, and the Italian Amalfi Coast, each one canceling the honeymoon reservations I had secured through years of professional connections. Reservations that were practically impossible to get and that I had planned to present to the couple after their wedding. Dear Amelia, I wrote to the manager of the Cliffside Villa in Positano. Unfortunately, I need to cancel the 2-week reservation for Wellington Pearson this coming September. Please release the villa back into your inventory. I do hope we can work together on another event soon. As I pressed send on the final cancellation, a strange lightness spread through my chest. For the first time in decades, I had prioritized my own dignity over my son's desires. It felt foreign, uncomfortable, and oddly freeing. I reached for my phone again, this time dialing my travel agent. Sandra, it's Diana Wellington. Remember that trip to Aspen we've been talking about for years? I'd like to book it. For tomorrow. Yes, just me. First class everything. 24 hours later, I settled into a plush chair on the terrace of the Little Nell, Aspen's most exclusive hotel. The mountains stretched before me, majestic and eternal, as a server placed a flute of champagne in my hand. Would you like me to take a photo, ma'am? He offered, noticing me admiring the view. Yes, I decided, handing him my phone. That would be lovely. I smiled into the camera, champagne flute raised slightly, mountains gleaming behind me. Not the practiced smile of the professional event planner or the supportive smile of the devoted mother. Just Diana Wellington taking her first sip of a life reclaimed. After the server returned my phone, I studied the image. I looked different. Lighter somehow. I posted it to Instagram with a simple caption. New beginnings. Lark's Aspen getaway. Treating myself. Then I silenced my phone, slipped it into my purse, and turned my attention to the sunset painting, the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Tomorrow would bring consequences, explanations, perhaps confrontations. But tonight belonged to me alone. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by the unfamiliar sensation of mountain sunlight streaming through windows I hadn't personally dressed with blackout curtains. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't place myself. Then reality resettled. Aspen, the Little Nell, my impulsive escape. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, switching it off airplane mode. Immediately, it erupted in a frenzy of notifications, 68 missed calls, 42 text messages, and a flurry of Instagram activity. The majority of the calls were from James, 37 of them, starting around 8 p.m. last night and continuing at increasingly frantic intervals until 3 a.m. The remaining calls came from various numbers I recognized. Lisa from my office, several clients, and 5 from Vanessa's mother, Margaret Pearson, who had never once called me before. I sat up against the plush hotel pillows, scrolling through the text messages. They painted a clear picture of last night's unfolding drama. 7:46 p.m. from James. Mom, where are you? The honeymoon account is empty. 8:17 p.m. from James. Please call me ASAP. There's some kind of problem with the resort bookings. 9:03 p.m. from James. Are you seriously in Aspen right now? 9:10 p.m. from Lisa. Diana, is everything okay? James is at the office looking for honeymoon paperwork. Seems upset. 9:32 p.m. from James. Mom, this isn't funny. The Positano Villa says our reservation was canceled. What's going on? The messages continued, growing increasingly desperate as the evening progressed. By midnight, the tone had shifted from confusion to anger to something approaching panic. 12:17 a.m. from James. I don't understand why you're doing this. Please just call me. 1:45 a.m. from James. Vanessa is in tears. Her parents are furious. We had to tell everyone at the party that there was a misunderstanding about the honeymoon. Please, Mom. The final message arrived at 3:22 a.m. I never thought you'd be this selfish. We'll talk when you decide to act like an adult again. I read it twice, the accusation of selfishness striking me as particularly ironic. After 3 decades of putting James first, financially, emotionally, practically, taking one action for myself was deemed selfish. The realization settled over me like a clarifying frost, crystallizing thoughts that had been forming since yesterday's discovery. The room phone rang, startling me from my reflection. The concierge's polite voice informed me that breakfast was ready to be served on my private terrace whenever I desired. I thanked him, suddenly aware of a hunger that felt deeper than physical. Wrapped in the hotel's luxurious robe, I stepped onto the terrace where a covered breakfast waited. As I poured coffee from a silver pot, I made a decision. I would not call James back immediately. For once, I would not rush to smooth things over, to explain myself, to make everything better for him. Instead, I would have my breakfast, enjoy the mountain view, and consider what I truly wanted from this situation. The coffee was perfect, rich and fragrant in a way my hurried morning cups at home never were. The croissants were flaky and buttery, the fruit impeccably fresh. I savored each bite with unprecedented attention, realizing how rarely I ate without distraction, without mentally planning someone else's event or solving someone else's problem. My phone continued to buzz occasionally, but I left it on the table, screen down. Instead, I opened the leather portfolio the hotel had provided and began to write, the pen gliding across the heavy paper as I articulated thoughts I'd never allowed myself to fully form. I have spent 32 years defining myself primarily as James's mother. Before that, I was Frank's wife. When have I ever been simply Diana? What would it mean to prioritize my own dreams with the same dedication I've given to supporting others? The questions felt almost sacrilegious, contradicting the identity I'd built as the endlessly supportive mother, the widow who had channeled her grief into creating a beautiful life for her son. Yet they also felt necessary, vital even, to whatever came next. By the time I finished breakfast, I had filled several pages with reflections and possibilities. Some were practical, take the cooking class in Tuscany I'd always postponed. Others more profound, redefine my relationship with James as adult to adult rather than provider to dependent. All represented a fundamental shift in perspective. My life belonged to me, not just to those I cared for. Finally, I picked up my phone and dialed Lisa's number. "Diana, thank God. Are you all right?" Her relief was palpable. "I'm fine, Lisa. Better than fine, actually. I'm taking some personal time, but I wanted to check in about the office." "The office is fine," she assured me. "But Diana, James was here last night looking for documentation about honeymoon reservations. He seemed really upset. And this morning, Margaret Pearson called demanding to speak with you about this unconscionable situation. What's happening?" I took a deep breath, formulating a response that felt both true and appropriate. "There's been a misunderstanding about some personal arrangements I had considered making for James and Vanessa. I've decided to reconsider those plans, and apparently that's caused some consternation." "Does this have anything to do with the engagement party?" Lisa asked carefully. "Caroline Williams mentioned you weren't there, which seemed strange since she was invited." The direct question deserved a direct answer. "Yes, it does. I wasn't invited to the celebration." "What?" Lisa's shock confirmed what I already knew. My exclusion was both deliberate and unexpected. "But that's unbelievable. You're his mother." "Yes," I agreed simply. "I am. And now I'm also a woman reassessing some decisions. Lisa, I'll be in Aspen for the week. You have authority to handle anything urgent at the office. For truly exceptional situations, you can reach me by email, but I'd prefer to maintain some distance right now." After finishing the call, I scrolled through my contacts until I found James's number. My finger hovered over it briefly before I composed a text instead. "I am safe and well." The honeymoon fund was my personal money, not a guaranteed gift. The reservations were made through my connections and were also not guaranteed. I need some time to think about our relationship going forward. I'll be in touch when I return from Aspen next week. I pressed send before I could reconsider, then immediately silenced notifications from his number. It was the first boundary I had ever established with my son, a small action that nonetheless felt monumental. With deliberate movements, I dressed in the new hiking outfit I'd purchased at the hotel boutique the previous evening. Today, I would explore Aspen not as a mother concerned about a child left behind, or a business owner worried about unattended details, but simply as Diana, a woman discovering what it meant to prioritize her own joy. As I stepped out of my room, phone deliberately left behind, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in decades, the lightness of being accountable only to myself, if only for a day. The mountains awaited, and for once, so did I. The peace I had cultivated during my week in Aspen began dissolving the moment my plane touched down at home. My phone, which I had largely kept on Do Not Disturb mode, immediately vibrated with an incoming call from James. I declined it, not yet ready for that conversation, especially not in a crowded airplane cabin. Instead, I texted, "Just landed. Need to get home and settled. We'll call you tomorrow." His response was immediate. "We need to talk today. Coming over at 7. The directive, not a request, sent a familiar flutter of accommodation through me. My instinct, honed over decades, was to adjust my plans to suit his demand. Then I remembered the clarity I had found in Aspen, the pages of reflection I had filled in my journal, and the promise I had made to myself. "I have plans this evening. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. works for me. You're welcome to come to the house then." I could almost feel his surprise through the screen. In 32 years, I had never refused his requested timing for anything. After a full minute, 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, and finally, "Fine. Tomorrow at 2. The exchange set the tone for what I knew would be a challenging transition, not just for James, but for me as well. Establishing boundaries after a lifetime of having none would require consistent reinforcement. At home, I was greeted by mail piled neatly on my hall table. Lisa had been checking in, and a house that felt both familiar and somehow different. I moved through the rooms, seeing them with fresh eyes, the formal living room rarely used because it had been optimized for entertaining James's friends, the study dominated by shelves of his childhood awards and school photos, the guest room maintained primarily for his visits, though he hadn't stayed overnight in years. Every space reflected my identity as James's mother, rather than Diana Wellington, woman with her own preferences and interests. Even my bedroom, supposedly my most personal space, featured colors chosen because they were timeless rather than because I particularly loved them. "This needs to change," I said aloud to the empty house. I spent the evening unpacking, sorting through emails that had accumulated during my absence, and preparing mentally for tomorrow's confrontation. When I finally slept, it was with a determination that surprised me, a steely resolve to maintain the perspective I had gained. James arrived precisely at 2 p.m., using his key to enter without knocking. The casual assumption of access, which had never bothered me before, now struck me as presumptuous, another boundary to establish. "Mom," he stood in my kitchen doorway, looking both familiar and strangely like a stranger. At 32, he was the image of his father, tall, conventionally handsome, with the confident posture of someone who expected the world to accommodate him, which, I realized with a pang, I had always ensured it did. "James, would you like some coffee?" I kept my voice level, neither the over-warm maternal tone I typically used, nor the cool distance I had felt in Aspen. "I don't want coffee, Mom. I want an explanation." He remained standing while I sat at the kitchen island. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The embarrassment you've caused? Vanessa's parents had to cover the cost of the engagement party themselves when they'd been counting on your contribution as the groom's mother." I blinked, genuinely surprised. I was never asked to contribute to a party I wasn't invited to attend. "You know how these things work," he countered, waving away my response. "The bride's family handles the event, the groom's family contributes. It's tradition. Being invited is also tradition," I pointed out quietly, as is consulting both families about the guest list. It was Vanessa's parents' event, their social circle, which somehow included Caroline Williams, whose family I've worked with for years, but not me. I kept my voice calm, factual. "James, let's be honest, I wasn't excluded because I wouldn't fit in with the guests. I was excluded because Vanessa or her family didn't want me there, and you went along with it." He had the grace to look momentarily discomforted before rallying. "That's not the point. The point is that you retaliated by canceling our honeymoon arrangements. Do you know how humiliating it was to have the Positano Villa contact Vanessa directly to confirm the cancellation? Her entire family knows now that my mother was bankrolling our honeymoon, which makes me look like I can't provide for my wife." "I wasn't bankrolling anything," I corrected. "I was offering a gift, a very generous one, that I reconsidered after being explicitly excluded from your celebration. Gifts aren't obligations, James. They're expressions of relationship, and our relationship changed when you decided I wasn't important enough to include in your engagement party. So this was punishment," he concluded, his tone hardening. You were hurt about the party, so you decided to hurt us back by canceling everything and running off to Aspen. I considered his framing, testing it against my own understanding of my actions. No, it wasn't punishment. It was reallocation. The money I had set aside for your honeymoon was my money, earned through my business, saved from my personal expenses. When I realized I wasn't valued in the way I had assumed, I chose to invest that money in my own joy rather than in subsidizing people who didn't want me present at their celebration. That's incredibly selfish, he said, the accusation I had anticipated finally surfacing. After everything I've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I repeated, genuine confusion in my voice. Yes, staying close to home for college so you wouldn't be alone after Dad died. Taking that first job at Mitchell & Burke when I had better offers in Chicago because you were still struggling with the business. Visiting every Sunday for dinner even when I had other plans. I've organized my entire adult life around making sure you were okay. And the one time I ask you to take a step back and let Vanessa's family handle something their way, you have a complete meltdown. The alternate reality he described, one where he had been the supportive figure and I the dependent, was so at odds with my experience that for a moment I couldn't respond. Then, clarity washed over me, cold and bracing. This was genuinely how he saw our relationship. Somehow, my constant accommodation, financial support, and emotional care had been reframed in his mind as dependency. James, I said finally, keeping my voice steady with effort, I think we have very different understandings of our history. You chose State University because they offered you a full scholarship, which I had worked 3 jobs to help you qualify for. You took the job at Mitchell & Burke because they offered the highest starting salary and best advancement track, which we discussed extensively. And Sunday dinners were initiated by me, cooking your favorite meals each week because I wanted to ensure you were eating well. He shifted uncomfortably, but I continued, needing to complete this long overdue clarification. I have never, not once in your 32 years, asked you to organize your life around my needs. Quite the opposite. I built my entire business, my schedule, even this home specifically to support your goals and dreams, which I did gladly, because I love you. But that doesn't mean I don't exist as a person in my own right, with feelings that deserve consideration. So what are you saying? He demanded. That I'm ungrateful? That I owe you for being a parent? No, I said, suddenly tired. Parenting isn't a transaction. I chose to have you, to raise you, to support you, and I don't regret any of it. What I'm saying is that relationships evolve, and ours needs to. You're building a new family with Vanessa, which is natural and right, but in that process, you've treated me as disposable, someone whose feelings don't need consideration, whose presence isn't important, whose resources are expected, but whose personhood is inconvenient. That's not fair, he protested, but with less conviction. Perhaps not entirely, I conceded. But ask yourself this. Would you have excluded Vanessa's mother from your engagement celebration? Would you have dismissed her hurt feelings as unimportant? Would you have expected her to fund your honeymoon while accepting being treated as an afterthought? The questions hung in the air between us, unanswerable, because we both knew the truth. The Pearsons' social position, wealth, and connection to Vanessa granted them considerations I had been denied. I need to think about this, James finally said, his voice subdued. And I need to talk to Vanessa. We're still figuring out how to navigate between our families. I nodded, recognizing it was as close to acknowledgement as I would get today. I understand, and I hope you know that I still love you, James. That hasn't changed. What's changing is how I express that love. Not just for you, but for myself, too. He left shortly after, neither of us having reached the resolution he had clearly expected when he arrived. As I watched him drive away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for the painful conversation, pride in maintaining my new boundaries, anxiety about the uncertain path ahead, and underneath it all, a quiet certainty that I had taken a necessary step toward a healthier relationship, not just with James, but with myself. That evening, I did something I had contemplated throughout my time in Aspen, but hadn't quite found the courage to initiate. I called a real estate agent and scheduled an appointment to discuss selling my house, the 5-bedroom suburban home I had maintained, primarily because it held James's childhood memories and had space for the family I had always assumed he would bring home frequently. It was time to create a space that reflected Diana Wellington as she was now, not as she had been defined by others. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. The for sale sign appeared in my front yard on a Tuesday morning, its presence sending immediate ripples through my carefully constructed world. By noon, I had received calls from 3 neighbors, 2 of James's childhood friends' mothers, and Lisa from my office, all expressing variations of surprise and concern. "Are you ill?" asked Marianne Porter from across the street, the unspoken question hanging beneath her words. What else would prompt a settled widow to suddenly sell the family home? "I'm perfectly healthy," I assured each caller, just ready for a change. The explanation satisfied no one, least of all James, who called within hours of the sign's installation. "You're selling the house?" His voice held the same disbelief he'd exhibited as a teenager when I'd finally donated his outgrown childhood toys. Without even discussing it with me? "Yes," I confirmed, maintaining the calm certainty I'd been practicing. "I've been considering it for some time." "But this is our home," he protested. "All my memories are here. My childhood, Dad's last years." "The memories move with us, James," I said gently, echoing words I'd spoken to him decades earlier when we'd upgraded from our starter house to this larger home. "And it hasn't been our home for quite some time. You haven't lived here in 10 years. But I always assumed—" He trailed off, the unfinished thought revealing volumes about his expectations, that the house would remain unchanged, a museum to his childhood, that my life would remain centered around preserving his past while facilitating his future. "I know," I acknowledged. "We both made a lot of assumptions, but I'm making different choices now." The conversation ended with his reluctant acceptance, though I suspected the topic would resurface. What surprised me was how little his disapproval affected my resolve. The decision felt right, a concrete step toward the recalibrated life I was building. 3 days later, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Pearson, Vanessa's mother and the architect of the engagement party from which I'd been excluded, arrived unannounced at my door, her Mercedes gleaming in my driveway. "Diana," she greeted me with the practiced warmth of the socially proficient. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by." I felt it was time we spoke directly. I invited her in with equal politeness, curious about this unprecedented outreach. Margaret had never visited my home before, despite our children's relationship spanning nearly 2 years. In my living room, she declined tea but sat perched on the edge of my sofa, her designer handbag placed precisely beside her. At 55, she was only a few years younger than me, but presented a study in contrasts, her carefully maintained appearance speaking of regular cosmetic procedures, her clothing expressing the casual luxury of significant wealth. "I'll be direct," she began after preliminary pleasantries. "James has told us about your reaction to the engagement party arrangements. I want to clear the air before this situation affects the wedding planning." "I appreciate your directness," I responded, matching her tone, "though I'm curious why this conversation is happening now rather than before the engagement celebration." Margaret's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "The party was necessarily limited by venue capacity. We had obligations to Richard's business associates and our social circle that couldn't be overlooked." "Of course," I said, not bothering to point out that venues with 200 guests could surely accommodate one more, just as I had obligations to myself that couldn't be overlooked when it came to providing funds for a honeymoon. Her carefully composed expression flickered. "I understand you're upset." "No," I interrupted gently. "I'm not upset. Not anymore. I've simply adjusted my expectations and priorities. The funds I had set aside for James and Vanessa's honeymoon have been reallocated to my own travel and life experiences. My home is being sold, so I can downsize to something that better suits my current needs. These aren't emotional reactions, Margaret. They're rational realignments." She studied me with new calculation, visibly reassessing the situation. "I see. And what would it take to realign things back to their original arrangement? The wedding is only 5 months away, and the young couple had been counting on certain contributions." The transactional nature of her approach clarified everything about the dynamic I'd been experiencing. To Margaret Pearson, I wasn't James's mother or a potential in-law. I was a resource to be managed, someone whose financial contributions were expected, but whose feelings and presence were optional. "Nothing," I answered simply. "Some changes, once made, don't reverse. My relationship with James is evolving, and that includes my financial support. He's 32, established in his career, marrying into a family of considerable means. He doesn't need his mother funding his honeymoon. This will hurt him, she noted, a hint of threat beneath the observation. And by extension, Vanessa. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but it may also encourage them to build their marriage on what they can create together rather than what others provide for them. That's ultimately healthier, don't you think? Margaret stood, recognizing the immovable object she'd encountered. You've changed, Diana. James didn't prepare us for that. Yes, I agreed, rising as well. I have changed. But the more accurate statement might be that I've remembered who I am beyond my role as James's mother. It's a distinction that makes some people uncomfortable. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, reflecting on the encounter. Margaret's visit had crystallized what I'd been gradually understanding. In reclaiming my own life, I was disrupting a system of expectations that extended beyond just James. I was challenging an entire framework that defined women primarily through their service to others. The realization didn't diminish my resolve. If anything, it strengthened it. This wasn't just about my relationship with my son anymore. It was about modeling a different possibility, one where maternal love didn't require self-erasure. My phone chimed with a text from my real estate agent, an offer on the house just 3 days after listing. Full asking price, flexible closing timeline. The speed was surprising but fortuitous, another sign pointing me forward rather than back. I'll review the offer this evening, I replied, a calm certainty settling in my chest. The house that had witnessed 30 years of my life as James's mother would soon belong to someone else, and I would belong finally and completely to myself. Wellington Events. This is Diana speaking. Mrs. Wellington. This is Elaine Chen from the Modern Woman magazine. I'm calling to follow up on our interview request. I glanced at the calendar on my office wall, now filled with personal appointments alongside business commitments, a visual representation of my rebalanced priorities. 3 months had passed since my confrontation with James and Margaret Pearson. In that time, my house had sold to a lovely young family expecting their first child. I had purchased a sleek 2-bedroom condominium in the Arts District downtown, and I had begun the process of restructuring Wellington Events to reduce my personal workload. Yes, Ms. Chen, I have our appointment scheduled for tomorrow at 11 a.m. at the Westside Cafe. Does that still work for you? Perfect, she confirmed. We're very excited about featuring you in our Reinvention at Any Age issue. Your story has really resonated with our editorial team. After ending the call, I sat back in my chair, still somewhat bemused by the unexpected attention my transformation had garnered. It had begun with a casual social media post from a client who had attended a charity gala where I'd spoken openly about my recent life changes. Somehow, that post had caught the attention of a lifestyle blogger, then a local newspaper columnist, and finally, national women's magazines. The narrative they found compelling wasn't particularly dramatic by media standards. Successful business owner and widow reclaims her identity after decades of prioritizing her only child. Yet something about the story had struck a chord, particularly with women my age who recognized themselves in my experience. My phone chimed with a text from Sophia, a divorced artist I'd met through a downtown community class who had quickly become a close friend. My first new friendship in years that wasn't connected to either James or my business. Still on for gallery opening tonight? New installation is mind-blowing. Absolutely, I confirmed. Meeting you there at 7. The easy camaraderie of this new friendship had been one of several unexpected gifts of my changed circumstances. Moving downtown had placed me in proximity to a vibrant community of artists, professionals, and entrepreneurs, many of them women in midlife reinvention like myself. For the first time in decades, I was building connections based purely on shared interests and compatible personalities, rather than through the prism of motherhood or business networking. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. Lisa entered, carrying a cream-colored envelope that instantly triggered a sense of déjà vu. "This just arrived by courier," she said, her expression carefully neutral as she handed me the envelope. "Special delivery." The heavy cardstock bore my name in elegant calligraphy. Without needing to open it, I recognized the formal invitation style and the implied significance of its delivery to my office rather than my new home, where James had yet to visit. Inside was exactly what I expected. an invitation to James and Vanessa's wedding, now just 2 months away. What surprised me was the handwritten note tucked behind the printed card, in James's familiar scrawl, "Mom, I hope you'll be there. Things have been strained, but I can't imagine this day without you. Can we talk? J." The olive branch was unexpected after months of minimal contact. Since our confrontation, our communication had been limited to brief text exchanges and one stilted lunch where neither of us had addressed the fundamental changes in our relationship. I had respected his need for distance, using the time to solidify my own transformation. "Are you okay?" Lisa asked, noting my prolonged silence. "Yes," I assured her, tucking the invitation into my desk drawer. "Just surprised. I'll handle it later." After Lisa left, I removed the invitation again, studying it with mixed emotions. The formal card represented everything that had precipitated my awakening: the social expectations, the family dynamics, the unspoken hierarchies that had marginalized me at the engagement celebration. Yet James's handwritten note suggested a potential opening, a recognition that something valuable was at risk of being lost. That evening at the gallery opening, surrounded by fascinating people engaged in vibrant conversation about art and ideas, I found myself sharing the development with Sophia as we examined an intricate glass sculpture. "So," she summarized after I explained the situation, "your son, who excluded you from his engagement party, then acted entitled to your financial support, is now extending what appears to be a genuine invitation to his wedding. The question is, what does this mean for your boundaries?" Her framing cut to the heart of my dilemma. I had spent months establishing and maintaining new boundaries in my relationship with James: financial, emotional, practical. Accepting this invitation without careful consideration risked undermining that work. "I want to attend his wedding," I admitted. "Despite everything, he's my only child, and I do love him. But I don't want to revert to old patterns where my needs and feelings are secondary." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Then perhaps the question isn't whether to accept, but how to accept in a way that maintains your boundaries. Meaning? Meaning you can attend as his mother who loves him, while still being Diana Wellington who respects herself. You can decline any role that feels performative or that subordinates your authentic presence. You can define your participation on your terms." The clarity of her perspective illuminated the path forward. I could respond to James's overture without sacrificing the growth I'd achieved. The relationship we might rebuild would necessarily be different from before, more balanced, more honest, more respectful of my personhood beyond motherhood. The next morning, I called James rather than texting, deciding that this conversation warranted real-time connection. "Mom," he answered, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "I received the wedding invitation," I said, keeping my tone warm but neutral. "And your note." "And?" The single word carried layers of uncertainty. "I'd like to have dinner," I proposed. "To talk, as you suggested. How about Friday at 7? I could introduce you to my new place." His hesitation was brief, but noticeable. "Your new condo? Yes, I'd like to see it. Should I bring Vanessa?" I considered the question carefully. The inclusion of Vanessa would change the dynamic of our conversation, potentially making it more difficult to address the most sensitive aspects of our recent history. Yet excluding her risked creating a separate tension. "Just you this time," I decided. "I think we need to talk openly, and that might be easier one-on-one. But please tell Vanessa she's welcome another time soon." "Okay," he agreed, sounding both relieved and nervous. "Friday at 7, I'll bring wine." "Looking forward to it," I said, and found that I genuinely was, not with the anxious desire to please that would have characterized my anticipation in the past, but with a calm readiness to engage in an adult relationship with my adult son. After ending the call, I opened my calendar and blocked off the entire afternoon before our dinner. Not for excessive preparation or anxiety-driven cleaning, as I might have done previously, but for a massage appointment and quiet reflection time. Whatever came from the evening's conversation, I was determined to enter it as my full, centered self. A mother, yes, but also a woman with her own rich identity, independent of that role. The wedding invitation remained on my desk, a symbol of both past complications and possible future reconciliation. I would attend, but on new terms, terms that honored both my love for my son and my respect for myself. It was, I reflected, exactly the balance I had been seeking all along. I spent more time selecting an outfit for dinner with James than I had for any event in recent memory. Not because I was trying to impress him, but because I wanted my appearance to reflect the woman I had become. Confident, self-possessed, thriving. I finally settled on a vibrant blue dress I'd purchased during my latest solo trip, a weekend art retreat in Santa Fe that had awakened a passion for Southwestern aesthetics I'd never previously explored. My new condominium provided the perfect backdrop for this evolving version of myself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, contemporary art-adorned walls painted in colors I genuinely loved rather than neutral tones selected for resale value, and the open floor plan reflected my newfound appreciation for spaces designed around my preferences rather than others' comfort. At precisely 7 p.m., the concierge called to announce James's arrival. The formality of this process, so different from his previous ability to simply walk into my home unannounced, established a subtle but important shift in our dynamic before he even reached my door. "Mom?" he greeted me, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. His eyes darted past me, taking in the unfamiliar space. "This is, wow, not what I expected." "Come in," I invited, accepting the wine with a genuine smile. "Let me give you the tour." As I guided him through my new home, I observed his reactions carefully. Surprise registered as he noted my bold design choices, the abstract painting dominating one wall, the vibrant area rug imported from Morocco, the sleek modern furniture that bore no resemblance to the traditional pieces I'd favored in our family home. "Where are all the family photos?" he asked, noticing the absence of the extensive gallery wall that had chronicled his childhood in meticulous detail. "I have a selection in the guest room," I explained, "but I wanted the main living space to reflect my current life, not just my past." A flicker of something, hurt, confusion, crossed his face before he nodded. "It's very different, but it suits you somehow." "Thank you," I said simply, accepting both the compliment and the implied acknowledgement of change. "Shall we have dinner? I've prepared paella, a recipe I learned in my cooking class." Over dinner at my new dining table, selected to seat 6 for entertaining new friends rather than the 12-person behemoth I'd maintained for hypothetical family gatherings, the conversation began cautiously. James spoke of work developments, Vanessa's recent promotion, mundane details that carefully avoided our lingering tension. I let him maintain the superficial exchange through the first course, recognizing his need to establish comfort before diving deeper. Only after pouring our second glasses of wine did I gently redirect. "Your note mentioned talking," I prompted. "I'm guessing you meant about something more significant than traffic patterns on your commute." He smiled fleetingly at my directness, a quality that had become more pronounced in my communication style since my transformation. "Yes, about the wedding primarily, and everything that's happened since the engagement party." "I'm listening," I encouraged, keeping my expression open. James set down his fork, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "First, I want to apologize for the engagement party situation. You should have been invited. Not including you was wrong, and I should have stood up to Vanessa's parents about it." The directness of his apology surprised me. James had rarely acknowledged mistakes so explicitly. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot to me." "Vanessa and I have had a lot of discussions about family dynamics since then," he continued. "Especially after you sold the house and canceled the honeymoon plans. It forced us to examine expectations we hadn't really questioned." "Such as?" I prompted when he paused. "Such as the assumption that you would always be available on our terms, that your resources were essentially extensions of what we were entitled to." His candor was startling. I realize now how one-sided our relationship had become. I'd grown accustomed to your support without considering whether my behavior warranted it. My throat tightened unexpectedly. This level of self-awareness represented significant growth on his part, the kind I had hoped for but hadn't dared expect. "Your Instagram post from Aspen was a wake-up call," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Seeing you there, clearly happy and independent, forced me to recognize you as a person separate from your identity as my mother." Which sounds terrible when I say it aloud. "Not terrible," I corrected gently. "Just human. We all fall into patterns in our closest relationships. Breaking those patterns is uncomfortable for everyone involved." He nodded, then reached for the gift bag he'd brought, sliding it across the table. This is a small token, not of apology exactly, though I am sorry, more of recognition. Inside, I found a beautifully bound leather journal embossed with my initials and a fountain pen of remarkable craftsmanship. For your travels, he explained. Vanessa mentioned you've been planning a trip to Portugal? She found this artisan who makes custom journals for travel writing. The thoughtfulness of the gift, selected not to appease me or fulfill obligation, but to support my new interests, touched me deeply. More significant than the items themselves was the acknowledgement behind them, recognition of my life beyond motherhood. It's perfect, I said sincerely. Thank you. So, he ventured after a moment, about the wedding. We want you there, not out of obligation, but because you're important to us, to me. No matter how strained things have been. I want to be there, I assured him. I've always wanted to celebrate this milestone with you. We'd also like you to participate in a more official capacity, he continued, a hint of his old hesitancy returning. Not as a planner. We've hired someone, knowing you'd want to enjoy the day as a guest, but as a reader during the ceremony. There's a passage about love and growth that made us think of you. The invitation held meaning beyond the surface request. An acknowledgement of my place in his life, not as the behind-the-scenes support staff I had often functioned as, but as a visible, valued presence. I'd be honored, I said, emotion coloring my voice despite my best efforts at composure. Relief visibly washed over him. There's one more thing. Vanessa and I have decided not to accept financial help from either set of parents for the honeymoon. We're scaling back our original plans to something we can afford ourselves. The decision represented a maturity that filled me with quiet pride. That's a wise choice. Building your marriage on what you create together establishes an important foundation. We learned that from you, he said quietly. From watching you reclaim your independence this past year, it's been challenging to adjust to, but also inspiring in a way. As we finished dinner and moved to the balcony for dessert, our conversation shifted to genuine exchange. James sharing his anxieties about marriage and career transitions, me offering perspective without attempting to solve his problems. For perhaps the first time, we were communicating as adults with separate but connected lives rather than as mother and dependent child. When he left shortly before midnight, our goodbye held none of the awkwardness that had characterized our recent interactions. The reconciliation wasn't complete. Too much had changed for us to simply revert to old patterns. But a bridge had been established across the new geography of our relationship. As I cleaned up after his departure, I noticed he had left something on the entryway table, a wedding invitation addressed to Diana Wellington and guest. The subtle acknowledgement of my potential social life, independent of family obligations, was not lost on me. Progress, I reflected as I prepared for bed, often came in small but significant gestures. Tonight had offered several such moments, each representing not a return to our past dynamic, but the construction of something healthier for us both. Diana Wellington? I turned at the sound of my name, coming face to face with a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s. The gallery opening was in full swing around us, the converted warehouse space filled with Seattle's art enthusiasts examining the latest exhibition of contemporary sculpture. Yes, I responded, taking in his tailored blazer and the intelligent warmth in his gray eyes. Robert Castellano, he extended his hand. I believe we have a mutual friend in Sophia Chen. She mentioned you might be attending tonight. Recognition dawned. Ah, the architectural photographer. Sophia has shown me your work. The series on repurposed industrial spaces was remarkable. His smile deepened, creating appealing creases around his eyes. That's very kind. I'd love to hear more about what resonated with you in those images, perhaps over a glass of wine? 2 hours later, we were still deep in conversation at a small wine bar adjacent to the gallery. Robert's passion for his craft was infectious, his perspectives on urban transformation aligning with interests I'd only recently begun to explore. More refreshing still was his attentive listening when I shared thoughts on my own creative pursuits, the cooking classes, the travel writing, the watercolor painting I'd begun experimenting with. It sounds like you're in a significant period of renaissance, he observed, refilling my glass from our shared bottle. That's precisely it, I agreed, pleased by his perception. A renaissance rather than reinvention. These interests were always part of me, just dormant, while other priorities took precedence. I understand that completely, he said. After my divorce 10 years ago, I rediscovered aspects of myself that had been sidelined during my marriage, not because my ex-wife actively suppressed them, but because relationships create certain patterns we unconsciously adapt to. The resonance with my own experience was striking. That's exactly what I've been navigating with my son. Breaking patterns established over decades is challenging for both parties. By the end of the evening, we had exchanged phone numbers and a promise to meet again for a photography exhibition featuring his work the following weekend. Walking to my car afterward, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of connection, based on mutual interest and respect rather than obligation or history. Over the next 6 weeks, Robert and I developed a relationship that defied easy categorization. We enjoyed galleries, concerts, and culinary adventures together. Our conversations ranging from artistic philosophies to personal histories to current events. His presence in my life introduced an unexpected dimension to my ongoing transformation. The possibility of romantic companionship distinct from the settled patterns of my marriage or the self-sufficient solitude I'd been cultivating. "Would you consider accompanying me to my son's wedding?" I asked during dinner at my condominium one evening, surprising myself with the spontaneity of the invitation. "It's 3 weeks away. Black tie at the Pearson estate. Fair warning that it may involve navigating some complex family dynamics." Robert considered me thoughtfully, twirling pasta on his fork. "Are you sure? First family events carry significant weight in any relationship." "That's precisely why I'm asking," I admitted. "This wedding represents a turning point in my relationship with James. Having you there, someone who knows me as I am now, not just as James's mother, would help me maintain the perspective I've worked hard to establish." His expression softened with understanding. "In that case, I'd be honored. Though I should warn you that I dance with excessive enthusiasm at weddings." "Noted," I replied, smiling at the mental image. "I'll be sure to wear suitable footwear." The wedding invitation specifying and guest had sat on my counter for weeks, a possibility I hadn't initially considered pursuing. My transformation had been focused on reclaiming independence, not seeking new partnership. Yet Robert's presence in my life had evolved organically, adding richness without demanding sacrifice of my newly established identity. 2 days before the wedding, I found myself in an unexpected situation. Seated in my office across from Margaret Pearson, who had requested a private meeting through my assistant. "Thank you for making time," she began, her impeccable appearance belying the faint tension in her posture. "I wanted to discuss the wedding arrangements directly, to ensure everything goes smoothly." "Of course," I responded neutrally, curious about this unprecedented outreach. Margaret hesitated, seemingly searching for words, a notable departure from her usual polished delivery. "I understand you'll be bringing a guest to the wedding. Robert Castellano, the photographer?" The specificity of her knowledge surprised me. "Yes, how did you—" "Seattle is a small social ecosystem," she explained with a dismissive gesture, "particularly in art circles. Richard and I attended a charity auction last month where Robert's work was featured. He's quite well regarded." I waited, sensing there was more behind this fact-finding mission than mere curiosity about my plus one. "The seating arrangements are quite precise," she continued. "You and Mr. Castellano will be at table 3 with James's godparents and a few family friends. I wanted to ensure that was acceptable." The transparent excuse for her visit was almost amusing. What Margaret really wanted was to assess my relationship with Robert and its potential implications for the carefully orchestrated social performance that was her daughter's wedding. "That sounds perfect," I assured her, deciding to address the unspoken concern directly. "Robert and I are looking forward to celebrating James and Vanessa's day. Our relationship is relatively new, but meaningful. You needn't worry about any disruption to the proceedings." A flicker of something, embarrassment, respect, crossed her features before her social mask reasserted itself. "Excellent. I should also mention that the mother-son dance will follow immediately after the father-daughter dance. James was quite insistent about including that tradition." This was news to me. James hadn't mentioned a planned dance during any of our conversations about the wedding. The inclusion touched me unexpectedly, representing another small step in our evolving reconciliation. "I'll be prepared," I promised, making a mental note to ensure my dress allowed for comfortable movement. After Margaret left, I sat reflecting on the encounter, recognizing it as symbolic of my changed position. 6 months earlier, I would have been desperately seeking Margaret's approval, anxious to conform to Pearson family expectations. Now I viewed her assessment with detached amusement, secure in my own choices. That evening I called James, feeling a renewed appreciation for his growth in the midst of these complex family dynamics. "I heard about the mother-son dance," I said when he answered. "That was thoughtful of you to include." "Of course," he replied, sounding genuinely surprised that I might have expected otherwise. "Some traditions are worth keeping, even as we establish new patterns." The insight reflected a maturity that filled me with quiet pride. "Also, I wanted to confirm that I'll be bringing Robert Castellano as my guest. Your future mother-in-law paid me a visit today to discuss seating arrangements, but I suspect her real mission was reconnaissance." James laughed, a genuine, uninhibited sound I hadn't heard from him in months. "Vanessa warned me that might happen. For what it's worth, she's mortified by her mother's behavior and apologizes in advance for any additional interrogations at the rehearsal dinner." "I can handle Margaret Pearson," I assured him, pleased by the conspiratorial tone of our exchange, a new dynamic where we could acknowledge family complexities as equals rather than adversaries. After ending the call, I opened my closet to examine the dress I'd selected for the wedding, a sophisticated midnight blue gown that complemented my silver hair and reflected my authentic style rather than conforming to traditional mother-of-the-groom expectations. Beside it hung the elegant but sensible heels I'd chosen, now reconsidered in light of the upcoming dance. With decisive movements, I replaced them with the hand-painted blue suede pumps I'd purchased on impulse during my Santa Fe trip, slightly higher, significantly more striking, and absolutely reflective of Diana Wellington as she now chose to present herself to the world. For the first time, I found myself genuinely looking forward to my son's wedding. Not with anxious anticipation of a role to be perfectly performed, but with authentic excitement for a meaningful celebration where I would appear fully as myself, new companion by my side and hard-won wisdom in my heart. The Pearson estate sprawled across 5 manicured acres, its limestone facade glowing in the late afternoon sun as Robert and I approached the security checkpoint. Luxury vehicles lined the winding driveway, disgorging guests in formal attire while uniformed staff directed traffic with practiced efficiency. "Impressive," Robert murmured, his photographer's eye clearly noting compositional details. "Though perhaps a bit excessive?" I supplied with a small smile. I was going to say performative, but yes, his observation aligned perfectly with my own feelings about the venue, a setting designed to showcase the Pearsons' wealth and social position rather than to create meaningful connection between families. 6 months ago, I would have been intimidated by the grandeur, anxious about measuring up to unstated expectations. Today, I simply appreciated the aesthetic aspects while maintaining healthy detachment from the implied social hierarchy. "Diana," Lisa approached as we entered the reception area, elegant in a silver cocktail dress. As my assistant and friend, she had been invited independently, a gesture from James that I appreciated. "You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely pleased with my appearance. The midnight blue gown draped gracefully, its subtle beading catching the light when I moved. My silver hair, recently styled in a more contemporary cut, complemented the sophisticated ensemble. Most significant was what couldn't be seen, the confident posture and calm presence I now carried, products of my internal transformation. "Lisa, this is Robert Castellano," I introduced. "Robert, my right hand and dear friend, Lisa Chen." As they exchanged pleasantries, I scanned the gathering crowd, noting the distinct clustering of guests. Pearson family connections forming the largest contingent, with James's friends and professional associates in smaller groupings. In a corner near the bar, I spotted a handful of Wellington family members, my late husband's sister and her children, looking somewhat out of place amid the opulence. "I should greet my in-laws," I told Robert. "Would you like to join me, or would you prefer to explore?" "I'll accompany you," he decided, offering his arm with a warmth that steadied me. Family introductions are always more manageable with reinforcements. His presence proved invaluable as we navigated the pre-ceremony mingling. Margaret Pearson's barely concealed assessment, Richard Pearson's perfunctory handshake, Vanessa's maternal grandmother's pointed questions about Robert's profession and background, all were met with his gracious self-possession, neither defensive nor overly eager to impress. "You're handling the Pearson Inquisition remarkably well," I commented as we momentarily stepped away to accept champagne from a circulating server. I've photographed enough society weddings to recognize the dynamics, he replied with a wink. Besides, their evaluation says more about their priorities than about us. The simple us in his statement registered with unexpected significance, a casual acknowledgement of our connection as a unit facing this social scrutiny together rather than as isolated individuals. Before I could respond, a string quartet began the processional music, signaling guests to take their seats for the ceremony. The garden setting was undeniably beautiful. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, facing an elaborate floral arch where James already stood with the officiant and his groomsmen. Robert squeezed my hand gently as we found our reserved seats in the third row, close enough to indicate family status, but not in the front row, which was occupied exclusively by the Pearsons and their most distinguished relatives. The symbolic hierarchy might have bothered me earlier in my journey, but today it simply seemed like a transparent reflection of priorities I no longer shared. The ceremony proceeded with polished precision. Vanessa radiant in a designer gown as she processed down the aisle on her father's arm, vows exchanged with well-rehearsed emotion, music swelling at perfectly timed intervals. When I was called forward for my reading, I approached with calm confidence, the passage about growth and authentic partnership taking on deeper personal meaning given my recent evolution. As I returned to my seat, I caught James's eye. The gratitude and recognition in his expression touched me unexpectedly, acknowledgement of both my role in his life and my recent transformation. In that brief exchange, I sensed a new foundation forming between us, one built on mutual respect rather than dependency or obligation. The reception that followed in the Pearsons' grand ballroom reflected the same meticulous planning as the ceremony. Elaborate floral centerpieces adorning linen-draped tables, a live band performing tasteful classics, gourmet food presented with artistic flair. Robert and I were seated with James's godparents and several Wellington family friends. A comfortable arrangement that allowed for genuine conversation rather than strained social performance. "Diana, you must tell Henry about your Santa Fe trip," encouraged Susan Blackwell, James's godmother and my friend of 30 years. He's been considering a similar art retreat. The request would have flustered me 6 months earlier, drawing attention to my personal pursuits in a setting where I had historically defined myself solely as James's mother would have seemed inappropriate, almost selfish. Now I engaged enthusiastically, sharing details of the experience that had proven so transformative for my creative expression. "You've always had an artistic eye," Susan commented, "but there's something different now, a willingness to pursue it openly. It suits you." "Thank you," I replied, recognizing the observation as both accurate and affirming. It's been a journey of rediscovery in many ways. When dinner concluded and the formal dances began, I watched Richard Pearson lead Vanessa onto the floor with practiced grace, their movement reflecting years of professional dance instruction. As their waltz concluded to polite applause, the band's leader announced, "And now, the groom and his mother." James appeared at my side, extending his hand with a slight bow. "May I have this dance, Mom?" As we moved onto the floor, I was acutely aware of the watching crowd, not with the self-consciousness that would have once plagued me, but with quiet confidence in both my movement and my presence. The dance lessons I'd impulsively signed up for after learning about this tradition had prepared me technically, but it was the internal transformation of recent months that allowed me to truly inhabit the moment. "You're full of surprises lately," James commented as we moved smoothly through the waltz. "The reading, the dress, the dance skills, even your date has Margaret practically redesigning her social spreadsheets." I laughed softly at his perception. "Life is more interesting with a few surprises, don't you think?" "I'm beginning to appreciate that," he acknowledged, executing a perfect turn. "Seeing you build this new chapter has been educational, challenging sometimes, but ultimately inspiring." The admission, offered without prompting or expectation, represented perhaps the most meaningful gift of the day. As the music concluded and James escorted me back to my table, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the elaborate celebration surrounding us and everything to do with the subtle but profound shift in our relationship. Robert rose to greet me, his hand warm at the small of my back. "Beautiful dance, though I feel obligated to warn you that my promised excessive enthusiasm on the dance floor bears little resemblance to that elegant waltz. I'm counting on it, I replied, suddenly eager for the moment when the formal portions of the evening would conclude and genuine celebration could begin. The night is young, and I've discovered I quite enjoy surprises. As the reception transitioned to open dancing, I observed the familiar patterns of wedding festivities, young couples dominating the dance floor, older guests retreating to conversation areas, family politics playing out in subtle seating rearrangements. But unlike previous social events, where I had carefully maintained my peripheral position as supportive mother, tonight I found myself fully engaged as a participant, dancing with Robert, conversing with friends old and new, experiencing the celebration through my own perspective rather than vicariously through James. It was, I realized, as Robert twirled me exuberantly to a classic Sinatra number, exactly what I had been working toward these past months. Not a rejection of my role as James's mother, but an expansion beyond its limitations. The ability to love him completely while living my own life fully. Happy? Robert asked during a momentary pause in the music, his expression warm with affection and understanding. Yes, I answered truthfully, in ways I couldn't have imagined a year ago. And as the band struck up another song and we rejoined the dancers, I embraced both the moment and the journey that had brought me to it. Steps both challenging and liberating that had led me back to myself. The uninvited mother who found herself instead. I read aloud from the glossy pages of Modern Woman magazine, my voice catching slightly on the unexpected headline. I don't recall approving this title. Editorial decision, explained Elaine Chen apologetically through my speakerphone. We found it captured the essence of your story in a way that would resonate with readers. If you're uncomfortable— No, I interrupted, studying the full-page photograph that accompanied the article. Myself in my new living room, silver hair gleaming in natural light, expression confident and serene. It's accurate if somewhat dramatic. I'm just adjusting to seeing my personal journey displayed so publicly. 3 weeks had passed since James and Vanessa's wedding. The newlyweds were honeymooning in Portugal. A scaled-back but meaningful trip they had planned and financed themselves, while I had returned to normal life, albeit a normal that bore little resemblance to my existence a year earlier. The magazine feature represented yet another unexpected development in my ongoing transformation. What had begun as a simple interview about midlife reinvention had evolved into a 6-page spread, complete with professional photography and deeply personal revelations about my journey from excluded mother to self-actualized woman. The response has been extraordinary, Elaine continued enthusiastically. Your story has generated more online comments than any feature this year. Women are sharing it across social media platforms, particularly the part about transferring the honeymoon fund back to your account and taking yourself to Aspen instead. I winced slightly at this characterization, which framed my actions as more deliberately vengeful than they had actually been. That particular decision was about reclaiming resources I had set aside from my own earnings, not about punishment, I clarified. The distinction matters to me. Of course, Elaine agreed quickly. That nuance comes through in the full article. The editor-in-chief was particularly moved by your reflection on redefining maternal love as something that doesn't require self-erasure. She's interested in discussing a potential regular column exploring similar themes of midlife recalibration. The suggestion was so unexpected that I laughed aloud. A column? Elaine, I'm an event planner, not a writer. Your journal from the Santa Fe retreat suggests otherwise, she countered. The excerpts you shared demonstrate a clear voice and perspective that's clearly resonating with our demographic. Women in midlife who've dedicated decades to others are hungry for models of reclaiming identity without rejecting responsibility. After ending the call with a promise to consider the offer, I sat in my downtown office, contemplating this latest development. The article's publication marked a significant threshold, transforming my private journey into a public narrative accessible to strangers. The vulnerability was uncomfortable, yet strangely liberating, as if speaking my truth aloud had somehow solidified its reality. My phone chimed with an incoming text from Robert. Just saw the article. Powerful story beautifully told. Dinner tonight to celebrate your literary debut? His consistent support had become a cherished constant in recent months. Unlike previous relationships where I had unconsciously adapted myself to another's expectations, with Robert, I remained firmly anchored in my reclaimed identity, our connection enhancing rather than diminishing my sense of self. Love to, I replied. My place at 7? I'll cook that Moroccan chicken you enjoyed last time. My office door opened as Lisa entered, carrying a stack of mail and a knowing smile. So, you're officially famous now, she teased, placing a bundle of envelopes on my desk. The magazine hit subscribers yesterday, and we've already received 4 calls from potential clients who specifically mentioned the article. Famous is a significant overstatement, I demurred, though I couldn't help feeling pleased by the professional validation. Though I'm certainly experiencing more attention than I anticipated. Well, brace yourself for more, Lisa advised, pointing to the mail she'd delivered. Those 3 larger envelopes are from publishing agents. Apparently, your story has book potential. The suggestion was so far beyond my contemplation that I could only shake my head in bewilderment. A year ago, I was planning James's engagement party, or hoping to, at least. Now I'm being approached about writing a book. Life takes unexpected turns. Speaking of unexpected, Lisa continued, Margaret Pearson called while you were on the phone with the magazine. She'd like to meet for lunch next week, said it was important but not urgent. This development was perhaps the most surprising of all. Since the wedding, my contact with the Pearsons had been minimal and formal, polite acknowledgments at the ceremony's conclusion, a brief exchange about James and Vanessa's honeymoon departure, nothing suggesting a desire for deeper connection. Did she happen to mention why? I asked, curious about this unprecedented outreach. No details, Lisa replied. But she mentioned she'd read your article, which seemed significant given the timing. Later that evening, as Robert and I enjoyed dinner on my balcony overlooking the city lights, I shared the day's developments, the column offer, the publishing inquiries, and Margaret's unexpected lunch invitation. The professional opportunities don't surprise me, Robert observed, refilling our wine glasses. Your story touches on universal themes of identity, value, and self-reclamation that clearly resonate. But Margaret Pearson seeking you out? That's intriguing. Indeed, I agreed, contemplating the possible motivations behind her outreach. Perhaps she's concerned about how the Pearsons are portrayed in the article, though I was careful to avoid identifying details. Or perhaps, Robert suggested thoughtfully, your journey has prompted reflection on her own life choices. Sometimes witnessing another's transformation creates space to question our own established patterns. The insight resonated with my own experience of how profound change rarely occurs in isolation, one person's evolution inevitably affecting the systems they inhabit. James's growth in response to my transformation was the most obvious example, but perhaps the ripples extended further than I had recognized. Whatever her reason, I decided, I'll approach the conversation with openness. A year of boundary setting has given me enough security to engage without fear of being diminished. Robert's expression warmed with evident admiration. That's precisely why your story resonates so powerfully. You've demonstrated that reclaiming oneself doesn't require burning bridges, just rebuilding them on more balanced foundations. As we continued our dinner beneath the stars, conversation shifting to Robert's upcoming exhibition and my consideration of scaling back Wellington events to accommodate new creative pursuits, I reflected on the unexpected path that had led me here. What had begun as a painful exclusion had catalyzed a journey of self-rediscovery that continued to unfold in surprising directions. The magazine article rested on my coffee table inside, its headline capturing the essential truth of my experience. I had indeed found myself in the process of being excluded, discovering a wholeness and purpose that extended far beyond my role as James's mother. That identity remained important. I would always love my son deeply, but it now existed alongside other aspects of selfhood too long neglected. Most significantly, I had learned that love, in its healthiest form, expanded rather than diminished the self. My relationship with James was evolving towards something more balanced and authentic. My connection with Robert was developing on foundations of mutual respect and shared joy. Even the possibility of some rapprochement with Margaret suggested that genuine growth created unexpected openings for connection. "What are you thinking?" Robert asked, noting my momentary introspection. "That life's most important journeys rarely follow anticipated paths," I replied honestly, "and that I'm profoundly grateful for the unexpected turn mine has taken." As the city lights sparkled below us and comfortable silence settled between us, I felt an unfamiliar yet welcome sensation. the quiet confidence of a woman fully inhabiting her own life, neither defined solely by relationships to others, nor isolated in rigid independence, but balanced in the complex, beautiful dance of authentic selfhood and meaningful connection. It was, I reflected, exactly what I had been seeking all along, though I hadn't known to name it until the path revealed itself step by unexpected step. The restaurant Margaret Pearson had selected for our lunch meeting exemplified her characteristic approach, exclusive enough to signal status, but public enough to discourage emotional displays. As the maitre d' led me to our table, I spotted her already seated, impeccably attired in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Diana," she greeted me, rising briefly as social protocol dictated. "Thank you for making time in your schedule. You're looking well." "Thank you, Margaret," I replied, settling across from her. "You are too." An awkward silence descended as we navigated the preliminaries of menu selection and wine declining, her, and accepting, me. I waited patiently, curious about the purpose behind this unprecedented one-on-one meeting, but content to let her establish the agenda at her own pace. "I've read your article," she finally stated after our server had departed with our orders. "It was illuminating." "I imagine it was," I acknowledged, maintaining a neutral tone, though I was careful to focus on my personal journey rather than specific individuals. "Yes, I noticed that consideration." She adjusted her napkin with precise movements. "The Pearsons weren't explicitly named, though anyone in our social circle would recognize the circumstances described." I inclined my head slightly, neither confirming nor apologizing. "The story was mine to tell, Margaret. My experience, my growth, my perspective." "Indeed." She met my gaze directly, something shifting in her carefully composed expression. "That's actually why I wanted to speak with you. Your perspective, it's prompted some reflection." The admission, so at odds with her typical self-assured certainty, caught me by surprise. I remained silent, allowing her the space to continue. "I've always operated according to certain principles," she said, her voice taking on an uncharacteristic hesitancy. "Social position, family reputation, adherence to tradition, these weren't arbitrary concerns, but frameworks I believed necessary for securing Vanessa's future and maintaining our family's standing." "I understand that," I offered when she paused. "We all develop systems for navigating life based on our experiences and values." She nodded, seeming to appreciate the non-judgmental response. When James and Vanessa became engaged, I approached their relationship through that established framework. The engagement celebration, the wedding arrangements, even the hierarchy of family involvement were all managed according to principles that had served me well for decades. Our first courses arrived, momentarily interrupting her surprisingly candid reflection. After the server departed, Margaret continued with evident determination. "Your article described how exclusion became the catalyst for your reconsideration of long-established patterns. That resonated with me, though in a different context." She hesitated before adding, "3 months ago, I was not selected for the board position at the Symphony Foundation, a role I had worked toward for nearly a decade. The nomination went instead to Catherine Winters, who approaches arts patronage with less traditional perspectives. The parallels were not lost on me. Margaret experiencing professional exclusion while I navigated personal rejection. Both scenarios forcing unexpected reassessment of assumptions long taken for granted. "That must have been difficult," I acknowledged, recognizing the vulnerability beneath her disclosure. "It was illuminating," she corrected, deliberately echoing her earlier characterization of my article, particularly when several committee members mentioned wanting fresh approaches and more inclusive vision, terms that implied my carefully cultivated expertise was somehow insufficient or outdated. As our main courses were served, our conversation developed a rhythm I would never have anticipated. 2 women in their late 50s comparing experiences of disruption and recalibration, finding unexpected common ground despite our different values and circumstances. "The crux of your story," Margaret observed, "wasn't actually about the engagement party exclusion or even your son's expectations. It was about recognizing that systems that no longer serve us can be changed, even after decades of reinforcement." "That's an insightful summary," I agreed, impressed by her perception. The exclusion was merely the trigger that allowed me to question patterns I had long accepted as immutable. Margaret's expression reflected uncharacteristic vulnerability as she continued. I've built my entire adult life around certain hierarchies and expectations. The Symphony Foundation rejection suggested those systems may not be as valuable or permanent as I've assumed. Your article arrived at a moment when I was particularly receptive to its themes. And what have you concluded from these reflections? I asked gently. She smiled slightly, a genuine expression rather than her usual social mask, that perhaps it's not too late to reconsider certain approaches, which brings me to the actual purpose of this lunch. From her handbag, she withdrew an envelope similar to formal invitations I had often seen in my event planning career. Richard and I are hosting a significant anniversary celebration next month. 40 years of marriage. We've been planning an intimate gathering at our lake house, limited to family and closest friends. She slid the envelope across the table. I would be pleased if you and Robert would join us. The invitation represented a remarkable reversal. Margaret Pearson deliberately including me in a celebration explicitly defined as reserved for those closest to the family. More significant than the invitation itself was the implicit acknowledgement that our relationship had potential value beyond obligatory in-law tolerance. I would be honored, I replied sincerely, accepting the envelope. Thank you for including us. The honor would be ours, she responded, with unexpected warmth. Your journey has been instructive. Perhaps it's time I explored some new perspectives myself. As our lunch concluded, and we parted with genuine goodwill rather than mere social courtesy, I reflected on the extraordinary evolution of my life since that painful exclusion a year earlier. What had begun as one mother's reclamation of identity had rippled outward, affecting not just my relationship with James, but apparently even touching the carefully ordered world of Margaret Pearson. Later that evening, as Robert and I walked along the waterfront discussing the surprising lunch encounter, my phone chimed with an incoming video call from James and Vanessa, now in their final days of honeymoon in Portugal. "Mom," James greeted me, his face sun-bronzed and relaxed on the screen. "We wanted to share something exciting with you first." Vanessa leaned into the frame, her expression radiating happiness. "We've made a decision about our future. Instead of the suburban house we were considering, we're going to renovate the old boathouse property on my grandparents' land. The project needs someone with vision for repurposing historic spaces while maintaining their character," James explained enthusiastically. We immediately thought of Robert. Would he consider consulting on the architectural photography aspects? We'd value his perspective enormously. As they outlined their plans, a thoughtful blend of honoring family legacy while creating something uniquely their own, I recognized the hallmarks of growth mirroring my own journey. James wasn't rejecting family connection, but recalibrating it into healthier patterns. Vanessa wasn't simply following prescribed traditions, but questioning which served their authentic goals. "We'd love for you to be involved too, Diana," Vanessa added, surprising me with both the use of my first name and the direct invitation. "Your eye for creating spaces that reflect personal meaning rather than just social expectations would be invaluable." The inclusive language, the recognition of my expertise beyond maternal support, the genuine desire for connection on new terms, all represented the transformed relationship I had hoped might eventually emerge from the painful recalibration of the past year. "I'd be delighted," I responded sincerely, "both to offer any insights that might help and to watch you create a home that truly reflects who you are, individually and together." After ending the call, Robert and I continued our waterfront stroll, the setting sun painting Seattle's skyline in hues of gold and pink. "Another invitation," he observed with a smile. "Quite a change from a year ago." "Indeed," I agreed, contemplating the symmetry. Though the invitations themselves matter less than what they represent, relationships based on mutual respect rather than expectation or obligation. The difference, Robert noted perceptively, between being valued for what you provide versus being included for who you are. As we paused to watch the final moments of sunset, I reflected on the extraordinary journey catalyzed by that initial painful exclusion. What had begun as one mother's reclamation of self-worth had evolved into something far more expansive, a complete recalibration of how I engaged with the world and how it, in turn, engaged with me. The uninvited mother had not only found herself, but had, in the process, created space for authentic connection far more meaningful than obligatory inclusion could ever have provided. The $25,000 honeymoon fund returned to my account had purchased something far more valuable than a luxury vacation. It had bought the first step toward genuine self-respect and ultimately relationships of mutual value rather than one-sided accommodation. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Robert asked, offering his hand as we turned back toward the city lights. "Absolutely," I replied with quiet certainty, accepting both his hand and the open-ended question it represented. The journey continues, and as we walked forward together, I carried with me the most profound lesson of my year-long transformation, that sometimes the most loving gift we can offer, to ourselves and to others, is the courage to reclaim our own worth, even when that reclamation disrupts long-established patterns. For in that disruption often lies the possibility of something far more authentic and valuable than what came before. The uninvited mother had, in the end, extended her own most important invitation, to herself, to a life fully claimed and consciously lived. And in accepting that invitation, she had ultimately created space for connections more genuine than any formal celebration could provide. 8 months ago today, I posted that photo from Aspen with a champagne flute in my hand, I mused, scrolling through my phone calendar while sipping morning coffee. 68 missed calls followed. It feels like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Robert glanced up from the photography journal spread across our breakfast table, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Perspective is a curious thing. Sometimes the most significant turning points only reveal themselves after we've traveled some distance from them. We sat on the balcony of our rented cottage overlooking New Zealand's Marlborough Sounds, where emerald waters cut between forested hills to create a landscape that seemed designed for both Robert's camera and my increasingly confident watercolors. The 2-week creative retreat had been a spontaneous decision, a celebration of both the success of my recently published book and our first anniversary as a couple. My phone chimed with an incoming text from James. "Morning, Mom, or is it evening there? Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Saw your book displayed in the front window at Barrett's bookstore today. Surreal in the best possible way. Enjoy, NZ." The message warmed me in ways I couldn't have anticipated a year earlier. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had previously experienced, an adult connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation or dependency. The painful recalibration following the engagement party had ultimately created space for something healthier to emerge from the wreckage of old patterns. "James says my book is in the front window at Barrett's," I told Robert, still somewhat bemused by the unexpected literary turn my life had taken. The uninvited finding yourself, when others leave you out, had resonated with readers far beyond my anticipated audience, particularly women in midlife questioning long-established patterns of self-sacrifice. "Not surprising," Robert replied, reaching for the French press to refill our cups. "You articulated something many women experience but rarely see validated, that reclaiming oneself isn't selfish but necessary, even when it disrupts others' expectations." The journey from magazine article to published author had unfolded with startling speed. What began as a simple interview about midlife reinvention had evolved into a feature that went viral online, prompting a publisher's inquiry that culminated in a book contract signed just 4 months earlier. The resulting memoir, released barely 6 weeks ago, had already entered its 3rd printing. The publisher wants me to consider a follow-up focusing specifically on mother-adult-child relationships, I added, showing him the email that had arrived overnight. They believe there's significant interest in navigating that particular recalibration. "What do you think?" Robert asked, his question reflecting the dynamic I'd come to treasure in our relationship, his consistent interest in my authentic perspective rather than expectation of any particular response. I considered the question thoughtfully. I'm interested, especially if James might contribute his perspective as well. The most meaningful feedback I've received has been from readers appreciating that restoration is possible after disruption, that setting boundaries doesn't necessarily mean severing connections. My phone chimed again with a notification from Margaret Pearson, of all people. "Diana, I finished your book. Would appreciate discussing it when you return. Some insights particularly relevant to current considerations. Lunch, perhaps?" The message represented yet another unexpected development in the ongoing evolution of my relationship with James's mother-in-law. What had begun as thinly veiled antagonism had gradually shifted toward cautious respect following our post-wedding lunch. The Symphony Foundation rejection had indeed prompted Margaret to reconsider certain long-held positions, leading to tentative explorations of less rigid approaches to both social and family dynamics. Margaret wants to discuss the book, I told Robert with a raised eyebrow. That should be interesting. The ripple effects continue, he observed. Your personal reclamation, creating space for others to question their own established patterns. This observation captured the essence of what had unfolded in the months since that pivotal moment with the Aspen photograph, my individual journey inspiring unexpected reflection in others. The Wellington Events client who reconsidered her daughter's elaborate wedding plans in favor of something more meaningful. The book club that invited me to discuss intergenerational expectations among women. James's growing comfort with establishing boundaries in his own marriage, rather than defaulting to either parental family's expectations. The gallery called while you were photographing yesterday, I mentioned, gathering my sketching materials for our planned outing. They've confirmed the joint exhibition for spring. Your architectural studies paired with my watercolor interpretations of the same locations. This creative collaboration had developed organically from our individual practices, Robert's precise photographic eye complementing my more impressionistic painting approach. What began as weekend excursions capturing the same subjects through different media had evolved into a cohesive body of work that had attracted gallery interest beyond our expectations. From event planner to author and exhibiting artist in under a year, Robert noted with admiration. Most people require decades for such transformations. I had decades of preparation, I countered. 32 years of observing, absorbing, adapting. The change appears sudden only because the catalyst was so dramatic. As we prepared for our day's creative expedition to a remote bay accessible only by boat, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of these past 8 months. The painful exclusion from James's engagement celebration had triggered not just a personal awakening, but a complete recalibration of how I engaged with the world and how it, in turn, engaged with me. Wellington Events still operated successfully, though I had restructured it to allow more personal time for writing and art, while Lisa managed day-to-day operations. My approach to the business itself had evolved. Fewer society weddings, more meaningful celebration design focused on authentic connection rather than social performance. I received another speaking invitation, I mentioned as we loaded our supplies into the rental car. The Women's Leadership Summit in Seattle next month. They're particularly interested in the section from the book about reclaiming professional identity after years of putting others first. The speaking engagements had begun modestly. Local bookstores, then regional women's groups, now expanding to larger conferences and events. Each presentation reinforced what the book's reception had already demonstrated. A hunger among women of my generation for models of reclaiming identity without abandoning responsibility. You should accept, Robert encouraged. Your perspective resonates because it's balanced. Neither the complete rejection of caregiving nor the martyred acceptance of self-erasure. As we drove along the winding coastal road toward our boat launch, I considered how profoundly my life had transformed in less than a year. From the uninvited mother struggling to understand her exclusion to published author sharing her journey of reclamation. From empty nest to filled life. From defined primarily through relationship to others to self-defined while maintaining meaningful connections. James and Vanessa had begun renovations on their boathouse property, creating a home that honored historical elements while rejecting the formal grandeur of the main Pearson estate. Their choices reflected the balanced approach they'd developed in their own lives, respecting family tradition without being constrained by it, creating space for individual expression within partnership. My phone chimed with an incoming call from Lisa as we parked near the marina. A check-in about Wellington Events' latest high-profile client, and confirmation that everything was proceeding smoothly in my absence. Take your time in New Zealand, she insisted after we discussed the necessary details. The business is running beautifully, and these creative retreats clearly fuel your inspiration for both writing and painting. After ending the call, I joined Robert at the dock where our chartered boat awaited. Ready for adventure? He asked, offering his hand as I stepped aboard. Absolutely, I replied with a confidence that would have been unimaginable a year earlier, for whatever comes next. As the boat pulled away from shore, carrying us toward unexplored coves and inlets, I reflected on the lesson that had defined these transformative months. that sometimes the most loving gift we can offer, to ourselves and to others, is the courage to reclaim our own worth, even when that reclamation disrupts long-established patterns. The uninvited mother had become the author of her own story, literally and figuratively. The woman who had once transferred $25,000 back to her personal account in a first tentative act of self-respect now moved through the world with quiet certainty about her inherent value. The journey hadn't been without challenges. Relationships had required renegotiation. Boundaries had needed consistent reinforcement. Old habits had occasionally reasserted themselves in moments of stress. Yet the fundamental shift remained. I now approached each day as a conscious choice rather than an obligation. Each relationship as a mutual exchange rather than a one-sided accommodation. Each creative pursuit as a valid expression rather than a selfish indulgence. As New Zealand's extraordinary landscape unfolded before us, I reached for Robert's hand, grateful not just for his presence, but for the balanced partnership we had created. One that enhanced rather than diminished our individual identities. 8 months, I mused, from uninvited mother to published author with gallery representation, from questioning my worth to celebrating it. And the journey continues, Robert added, his camera already capturing the play of morning light on distant headlands. That's the beauty of reclamation. It's not a single decision, but an ongoing practice. The wisdom in his observation resonated deeply as I opened my sketchbook, ready to translate this extraordinary landscape into watercolor impressions. Each day still presented choices about boundaries, priorities, and authentic expression. Yet now those choices emerged from a place of self-knowledge and respect rather than habitual accommodation. The uninvited mother had, in the end, extended the most important invitation of all, to herself, to a life fully claimed and consciously lived. And in accepting that invitation, she had ultimately created space for connections more genuine than any formal celebration could ever provide.